welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. And more importantly, welcome back to the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma. If you've been following along, then you know that this series of conversations is a series of interviews that I'm having with leaders from various organizations that have a footprint in the Canadian optometry market to ask them the questions that we would like to ask as Canadian optometrists about what they see from their perspective as leaders from these large organizations, that the future of our profession is, and what we can do as optometrists to make sure that we are heading in the right direction to make sure our profession thrives. Now, if you've been following along, you know that the previous two episodes, the two interviews I had were with Dr. Alan Ulsifer from FYI Doctors, the CEO of FYI, and Dr. Darian Angle, the VP of Business Development from the Iris Group. And today's episode number 3, is probably the one that I think most people have been asking about and looking forward to hearing, because this one is with Mr. Bill Moir, the GM of Specsavers Canada. So the one who oversees all of Specsavers' planned growth across Canada over the next couple of years. And the reason why this is the one that so many people have been looking forward to is because that's really where this conversation started. This impetus for the Future of Canadian Optometry series began, of course, months back or last year when that announcement was made that Specsavers was coming to Canada, and they made their bold statements about their plans for growth, market growth, rapid growth across the country, 200 and 250 plus locations across the country that they plan to open in the next couple of years. And then the trickle-down effect, the second, third order effect of that, other organizations sort of battening down the hatches, beefing up their recruiting processes, ODs seeing their staff and optometrists being poached from them, or at least approached to be poached from them. So a lot of the conversations I was having with you guys out there, with colleagues across the country, really started a year ago when those announcements were being made. And so I was excited to finally sit down with Mr. Bill Moir to start to ask him some of these questions that I know many of us have had, because I've been going around and asking, texting, emailing, speaking over the phone about what conversation should we have, what questions should we be asking when we have somebody from Specsavers sitting down. What do you want to know? But I will say, at the beginning of every interview, I ask every guest to be as candid as possible. All right, I know everybody's going to have their canned responses, their planned responses. So they're giving their corporation their best face. But most guests are willing to kind of go beyond that and share their inner thoughts, what their personal feelings are. I will say that Bill was one of the guests who kept most of his answers close to the chest and played it from the most corporate kind of direction. But at the same time, I don't think you'll be disappointed with this interview, as Bill did really share some great insights as to what has happened in other markets with Specsavers in the UK, in Australia, and what he foresees happening here in Canada, what he sees as the gaps in the market right now where Specsavers feels like they can really fill in, and what they can do to change and for their own benefit for them to grow. So I think you're going to love this episode. I think you're going to take a lot away from it. Thanks again for tuning in for the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma. Here is the interview with Mr. Bill Moir. Mr. Bill Moir, thank you so much for joining me on this special episode of the 2020 podcast to discuss the future of Canadian optometry. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Harbir. It's nice for you to have me.
So as you likely know, a few months ago, I put essentially like a call out, more so an invitation to the leaders of various organizations that have a presence in optometry in Canada, and simply invited everybody to come on and discuss kind of what we think the future of optometry will look like. And since then, I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues from across the country and kind of getting their thoughts, sort of taking this national sort of temperature of the profession. And a lot of the questions and the conversation topics that we're going to cover today come from those conversations. They come from our colleagues from across the country who have questions that they'd like to have answered and are not always able to sit down like this with someone like yourself to ask them. And of course, Bill, someone like yourself and other guests who are part of this conversation are in somewhat of a unique position, right? Within the leadership of these large organizations who have this presence in Canada, in some cases in other countries as well. So you have this perspective from an angle that many of us don't. So, I'll ask these questions. I'd love for you to share them from kind of your unique perspective as much as you're able to or comfortable sharing. And I start everybody with the same question, and that is, from your perspective, how would you describe the current state of optometry in Canada?
Okay. Well, I think there are lots of positives about the current state of optometry, of the industry in Canada. Quality of education in optometrists is really strong, and I think optometrists in Canada are really well qualified to give good clinical care. However, I do believe that the needs of patients and customers in the market aren't being met all the time. We see a trend of consolidation of players in the market, largely by private equity firms. And the net result of this for customers and patients is that they increasingly have less variety of eyewear, they have higher prices, and that leads to longer return cycles. So we did a survey earlier on this year, and we learned that over half of Canadians don't think eyewear is affordable. And consequently, over a third of them haven't had an eye exam in the last 2 or 3 years. So we know that by making eyewear affordable, we can reduce return cycles, we can lead to more regular eye exams, which not only improves disease detection for the patient, but also grows the industry as a whole. So if we look at optometrists, it means this consolidation means there's less options for career development, for career progression, potentially less independence to practice, and it makes it harder to compete, and therefore harder to establish and operate their own business. So our aim is to reverse that trend of consolidation.
I understand Specsavers, of course, has a presence in many countries now, and imagine Specsavers does their homework, very diligently before entering a market. And I understand also that Specsavers has had their eye on Canada for a while. So what is it that, from your perspective, that made Canada look like a desirable location for Specsavers to land?
Well, as you're right, we have been interested in the Canadian market for a long time. We spent a lot of time in the country understanding the culture and the market before we decided to enter it. One of the things which is appealing about the Canadian market is whilst there's lots of different optical players here, we don't believe that anyone's really servicing the needs of customers in the way that we would like to. So as I said before, we're seeing high prices, long purchase cycles, leading to us, the market, not being able to always offer the best clinical care. So the consolidation in the market leads to that as well. The thing that we found most attractive about the market is we believe we can come in with a very clear offer for patients and for customers, which will lead to us delivering the best patient care to customers and doing it in a way where we ensure the independence and autonomy of optometrists and opticians and retailers.
So you've mentioned the consolidation part a couple of times. I did have a question a little bit later, but since it's come up already, I remember, I think in a press release or something, there was a statement that Specsavers' intent is to reverse the current trend of consolidation in the Canadian market, and obviously that's a big point of conversation, generally speaking. For a large entity like Specsavers that has the intent to have a couple hundred stores across the country and already 2,500, if I'm not mistaken, across the world. Is that much of a different presence than the consolidated presence of other organizations?
Oh, quite significantly. I mean, we've seen this in other international markets in the past. When we went into Australia, for example, 10 years ago, there was a company that had close to 50% market share. They had it across 3 different brands, but they'd grown by having acquired lots of small chains and independents, and they dominated frame supply to the independent optometrist competitors as well. So the end result was basically high consumer prices, long return cycles for customers, and consequently little investment to grow the market. So Specsavers operates quite differently. Our focus on affordable eyewear and access to high quality eye care, as well as the needs of our partners who own our stores and the local community. They're the key things that we bring to the market. So today, Specsavers optometrists are number one in Australia, for example, for all customers' eye care needs. The return cycles have significantly reduced. The value of the sector, of the optical sector in Australia, has doubled as a consequence of it, and the detection rates of eye disease have increased dramatically as a result as well. So what we bring by introducing that affordable eyewear, but access to really high quality eyewear, is we encourage people to visit their optometrists more often, and we set up more independent optometrists and opticians in their own business, in their own communities, being able to service needs for their customers locally.
In a setting like in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, they're private practice optometry wasn't as prominent as it is here in Canada, where I believe, I don't think I have the numbers exactly right, but it's like 60% of the market or so is private practice. With an entity like Specsavers, any large entity is going to come in and take up a lot of market share. It's conceivable that it's not just the consolidated companies that are going to be losing the market share, but a lot of the private practice optometrists as well.
Yeah, but we work with private practice optometrists, so that's our Specsavers optometrists are.
How would you say, what's the reception been so far for Specsavers in Canada with optometrists specifically?
It's been very, very positive. We've had really positive response from our partners and associates, and we spent a lot of time before we even entered the market listening to Canadian optometrists about what's important to them. And what we learned is that the investment in clinical equipment, their independence, being able to act and develop as professional while also understanding who they are personally, things like work-life balance and personal ambitions. These are the things that are really important to people, and they're really important to optometrists in the industry. We know there are also significant differences by province. So not every province is the same, and we've had to adapt our model and benefits it offers to suit different provinces where needed. Our core model of enabling and supporting optometrists to own and to build their own successful practice has been incredibly well received across the board. The high support, we put a very high support environment around our independent optometrists, and that allows them to focus on what really matters to them, which is patient care, where we can support them in all the other aspects of running their business, like product, supply, or marketing, finance, accounting, payroll, all these sort of things, which isn't really their core skill set or where they want to focus their time. So we've really spent a lot of time crafting a high support model, which is right and meets the needs of optometrists in the Canadian market.
On that note, actually, as I mentioned, over the last few months, I've been chatting with optometrists across the country. Before I even started doing that, when Specsavers, when it was kind of official or everybody knew Specsavers was coming into the market, I was curious, what was the kind of national, as much as I could, feeling or sentiment about Specsavers entering the market? Again, most of us knew that there was this intent for a long time, but when that initial acquisition of Image happened and the first sort of locations opened up, I did my own little unofficial poll of as many people as I could from across the country in different practice modalities. I texted, I emailed, I asked verbally. And the question was quite simple. What is your initial sentiment about Specsavers entering the Canadian market? Positive, negative, or indifferent? And I got about 40, how many do I have? 41 responses. And the answers were as follows: 1 positive, 26 negative, and 14 indifferent. First, I'd like to get your thoughts on that initially, how you would respond to that.
I think that's disappointing. I think it also goes to show how little potentially people know about the Specsavers brand and the work we've done in other markets. So what we've been doing, here, is being as open and as visible as we can be to try and share more about the business and help people understand what we do and what drives us. We're quite unique as a business in a number of ways. We are, privately owned, and we are owned and led by optometrists, which makes us quite unique. We are purpose-led. So Doug and Mary, who own the business, still actively lead and run it today. And they do it with the same level of passion, care, and commitment as they always have. But that means we don't need to answer to shareholders. So we're not beholden to a bottom line profit like a lot of private equity firms are. We're driven by, because they're optometrists, we're driven by improving people's lives through better sight. That's our aim. It's ingrained in our business and everything we do. We're a customer and a partner led model. So customer first because of our purpose and our ownership structure. We truly have a customer first mindset in everything we do. That's just from striving for clinical excellence in eye care to making sure that the high quality eyewear we have is accessible and affordable. And we're a partnership business. So all Specsavers stores remain owner operated under a really high support franchise partnership model. It's called a joint venture. And our aim is to make them successful, to support them so they can focus on the eye care and eyewear needs for their customers in local communities. So that's what we want to try and bring to Canada. That's our goal for Canada, is to provide Canadian communities with exceptional clinical care, advanced clinical equipment, with dedicated professionals owning their own business, looking after the needs of their patients. And we're being as open and transparent as we can with people, giving access to us to find out more about our business, so they can get to know us and they understand actually the good that we bring to the business. As I say, when we went to the Australian market 10 years ago, as a consequence of that, the optical market in Australia has doubled on the back of that. The disease detection for patients has practically doubled as well. So there is a lot of benefits we bring both to the industry itself and to patients and customers within it as well.
If I can expand a little on the poll. So when I ask these questions, I get the response. I would usually follow up with, okay, what's the reason? And between the negative and indifferent, some people kind of shifted back and forth. Generally speaking, the optometrists, excuse me, that were responding with indifferent, we're looking at it more from a business perspective. I'm comfortable with where my business is. I think it'll be fine. There's always new players in the market. It's all good. So they're not really thinking a whole lot about it. The negative, some of them were worried about their business, but the majority of them the negative was more so concerned about the profession as a whole, right? Not so much about their business, but the optometry profession across the country. Those were the interesting responses that I was really looking into. And when I looked into that, the concern about the profession as a whole, and these doctors who responded with a negative response, most of them were worried about the profession being devalued or commoditized. And a lot of those feelings were coming from what they had seen in other countries, Australia being one of them, the UK. What is your thought about those sentiments from optometrists?
I think if we look at what we've done in other markets and what our plans are for here as well, we're an optometry-owned business. So optometry is very much at the core of who we are. That's what drives us and that's what leads us. And our aim is to make sure we improve the industry, both for the professionals who work within it, as well as the customers and patients who rely on it on a day-to-day basis. So our aim is to grow the optical market as a whole in Canada by providing really high quality eye care and affordable eyewear to encourage more frequent visits, to change the market, encourage more frequent visits to optometrists, improve eye disease detection rates, as well as growing the market as a whole to give better patient care. And we'll share our knowledge from across the globe. We'll work with key stakeholders within the market to continue to grow and strengthen the industry too. That's from working with the colleges, investing in graduates to help grow future optometrists for tomorrow, working with associations across different provinces, and also working with different stakeholder groups across Canada to make sure we're continually developing and strengthening the industry. So that's our aim.
Generally speaking, making things, I understand the term, making eyewear more accessible. Making eyewear less expensive is one thing, but making eye care more accessible, does that also mean making it less expensive?
No, I mean, that's not our aim. As I say, our optometrists are independent, so they have their own autonomy to run their practice. But that's not our aim. Our aim, when we've talked to customers, research tells us it's the cost of eyewear and the often prohibitive cost of eyewear that stops customers visiting their optometrist. So our aim is to use our scale to bring high quality but affordable eyewear to customers to encourage them to visit their optometrist more often, and as a consequence of that, receive the eye care they need. We don't see any value in discounting the cost of eye care, and it's not our place to do that either because we have independent optometrists who take these decisions.
Is it the optometrists who set the price of the eye exam?
That's correct. We would try and always have optometrists that are like-minded with us. So we would want to have cost structure and pricing structure that's accessible to customers. But ultimately, it's the optometrist's independent practice.
What is I think you've already touched on it, the long-term goal for Specsavers in Canada?
Ultimately, we'd like to grow the Specsavers business so we can provide improved access, as I said, to high-quality eye care and affordable eyewear to benefit more customers and patients. That's the aim. So we said we're investing in rolling out 200 locally owned clinics, and they'll be equipped with the latest technology. They'll be rolling out across Canada over the next couple of years. And we're going to invest. That's a big investment play for us. We'll cover 100% of all the startup costs of every clinic, so that each optometrist and optician owner, partner, will have no costs to go into business. They'll cover all the design, construction, displays, etc. So we're empowering the independence of optometrists by reducing some of the common barriers to ownership. And by doing that, we aim to provide better levels of eye care to patients. And as I said, encourage more regular visits to optometrists from Canadians, as well as creating stronger career and business ownership opportunities for optometrists and opticians.
And does the current practice modality for an optometrist in Canada, the way we practice, the way our regulations are, does that align with that growth that Specsavers is planning to have over the next couple of years? Or do you feel that might need to change for that growth to happen? What's up, guys? I just wanted to take a minute to give our exclusive partner for the 2020 podcast, the Future of Optometry series, a shout out here, Aqueous Pharma. Aqueous is a Canadian pharmaceutical company with a simple mission: scour the globe for the best products and make them accessible to Canadian ECPs. The Evolve Intensive Gel is an artificial tear containing more drops per bottle than any other brand its size. Each drop is 28 microliters, which is the optimal volume for coating the eye without overflow. Its triple action formula contains sodium hyaluronate at the patient-preferred concentration of 0.2%, pure glycerol, which helps to support the lipid layer of the tear film, which is excellent for MGD patients, and cross-linked carbomer 980 that binds moisture to the ocular surface and extends the drop's residency time. As important as what's in the drop is what is not in the drop. The Evolve Intensive Gel is preservative and buffer-free, avoiding phosphates and citrates, which have been shown to sensitize the human conjunctival and corneal cells. So why do ECPs love partnering with Aqueous? Because they don't sell directly to patients, nor can their products be found in drugstores or at grocers or on Amazon. Patients can only purchase directly from your clinic or your website. Recommending ECP exclusive brands helps to support our profession, helps to build your practice, keeps your margins healthy, and keeps patients within your continuum of care. There has never been a better time to evolve your practice. To request your product samples, contact your Aqueous rep today by emailing contact@aqueouseyecare.ca. That's AEQUUS eyecare.ca. And don't forget to put the 2020 podcast in the subject line so they know you heard about them right here. And now back to this episode of the Future of Canadian Optometry series here on the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast, presented by Aqueous Pharma.
I don't believe it needs to change for the growth to happen. The model we've got in the stores we've already got are operating really successfully. So there's no need to change in order for us to meet our ambitions. However, we would certainly be working with the industry to constantly see how can we evolve and improve and develop the way we work as an industry. So we're providing continual development and opportunities for optometrists, as well as providing and continually trying to improve what we do and how we do it to provide better patient care.
When you say industry, are there specific entities that you're referring to?
No, I think just across the board, all the professional associations and colleges deal with the optometry and opticians across Canada.
So one of the questions the core question when I put that initial invitation out there was, and the core question I'm asking every guest that's coming on here is, what is your organization doing to support the growth and strength of the profession of optometry in the future?
Well, look, our aim is to make sure we improve the industry, as I said, for both the professionals who work in it as well as the customers and patients who rely on it. So that's it. We're very partner focused and patient and customer focused. And we want to do that by providing high quality eye care and affordable eyewear. And it's all about encouraging more frequent visits to an optometrist to improve eye disease detection rates, as well as growing market share as a whole and giving better patient care. We found from research we've done, people are more visit their car mechanic more frequently than do their optometrist. So there's something fundamentally wrong about that. in the
They're
industry.
driving the wrong cars, I think, Bill.
Well, maybe they are. Maybe they are, but they should be worrying more about the site than they are about the car.
Yeah, sure.
Over a third of Canadians haven't had an eye exam in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's what we're going to try and that's what we would like to try and change. We're making a considerable investment in our clinical proposition to make sure we deliver the best care, everything from the equipment which is available at our clinics to the development programs and opportunities we'll be creating for independent optometrists to work in them. And we'll share our knowledge across the globe of the work and work with key stakeholders to continually grow and strengthen the industry. So working with, as I said before, the colleges and associations and other stakeholder groups across Canada. We're also interested in investing in research and continuing education as well. And we run big clinical conferences in other regions as well to bring together professionals to try and continuously develop and grow our learning.
Do you think it's important for the scope of practice in Canada to continue to grow?
I think it's important for any industry to grow and develop and adapt to the needs of customers as they change. And I think that's fundamental. I think that's true of the eye care industry as well as anything else. One of the concerns, I suppose, I have is that with the consolidation that's happening in the eye care industry at the moment, it means many clinics will essentially be swallowed up by kind of private equity-owned businesses. And with that, the focus primarily often becomes about the parent company's bottom line rather than on the quality of eye care for their customers. And that means that through these providers, often the cost of eye care can increase, become more expensive. That increases the time between purchasing new frames and visits the optometrist, meaning ultimately Canadians don't get their eye exams more as frequently as they should do for their health. And we know that already from the research we've done. So that's the thing we are trying to stop and the thing we're trying to reverse by launching our brand with independent optometrists in the market.
So I understand the concept of lower priced eyewear results in more frequent visits back to the optometrist. How does that patient, either before they come in or after they leave, say, perceive that as a high value, high quality eye exam?
I think there's probably a couple of things that are key. I'd like to say it's all about the clinical experience. In reality, it's probably two things. It's about the clinical experience, absolutely, but it's also about the patient experience as well. So our compassion and expertise to help people feel good, feel cared for, and feel smart, that's effectively what we try and do. So we want people to receive the right care for them, gives them self-confidence, helps them see better. But they need to have a trusted expert, and they need to, part of that is around the experience they get in store and the journey and how they're led through that. And part of that's around the actual clinical experience they get. So that hence why we do things such as every customer who comes in as part of their standard eye exam would have a OCT as part of that eye exam. We know from other markets we've done that in that massively improves disease detection. And also from a customer feeling point of view, customers can see the value in that. They can understand the technology that's being used. They can see that, and they have a greater level of trust with their eye care professional that they're receiving the right level of clinical care.
How much does if you could, like roughly, if you know, an eye exam at a Specsavers in Australia cost?
Australia is different. So Australia is quite a unique market where the government pays for eye exams. So it's all government funded. So it's a very different model in Australia to how it works over here.
I gotcha. So in our case, would that be the same as, here in BC, we have MSP, or Ontario has OHIP and whatnot. Would it be the equivalent of that paying for the eye exam with no additional charge?
No, it wouldn't. It's a more significant contribution the government make. So MSP is more of a top up, I think, in BC, as opposed to how it works in Australia. So typically the clinics we have in BC charge $99 for an eye exam to customers, which is pretty much in line with the competitors across the market.
Is that how much you feel for a high quality comprehensive eye exam? You would say, in your opinion, $99 is the appropriate price?
The important thing, I think, for customers is to make sure we encourage them to visit their optometrist more often. That's the key. So for me, it's not about, or Specsavers, it's not about maximizing the revenue from every single visit, but it's about making sure customers are getting a great experience and high quality clinical care so that they return to the optometrist on a regular basis. That's the key thing. So from a customer point of view, they're receiving better clinical care. From an optometrist and from an industry point of view, you can argue we're getting better lifetime value as well.
Would you agree that if across the board, across the country, an entity such as Specsavers, it could be any company, but if they have a larger footprint, is charging a set price which is significantly lower or noticeably lower than most other private practice or other entities, that it changes the perception of the value of the eye exam, and that specifically the service, not talking about the eyewear, but the eye exam service, the perception of the value of that service then? If X company is setting it at a significantly lower price, then generally speaking, the service is not valued as much as if it was set at a higher price.
Possibly. I think the way the market is and the way the industry in Canada works in terms of how optometrists are rewarded actually encourages against that to a degree. I think it encourages more of a status quo in the market. If a particular business wanted to significantly reduce the revenue that was charged to customers from eye exams, they'd probably struggle to get optometrists wanting to come and work for them, if I'm being honest. I think the industry self-regulates to a degree on what customers should be charged and what a fair price is for an eye exam. Ways around that, ways to grow that, of course, are to grow the degrees of clinical care that are given. But generally, I think the market's quite self-regulating in that regard. In
BC, 12 years ago now, can't believe it's been that long, we had a pretty significant legislative change, regulatory change, where a large e-commerce player, Clearly Contacts, basically infiltrated the government and managed to change regulations to their benefit. What I want to see and what I'm asking all the guests is, like, do you foresee potential regulatory changes, whether in BC or across the country, by any given player to improve their outcomes versus specifically the benefit of optometry?
I wouldn't want to predict what changes could be made to the regulations in the future. The Clearly case was quite a significant change a number of years ago. Our aim, as we said, is actually to provide better access to eye care and more affordable eyewear to Canadians. That's it. And by doing that, it is to encourage people to visit their optometrist more often than they do today. We don't need or want really changes in regulations in order to achieve that. We're happy to work within the regulations that exist in the market at the moment. It really supports our model because we're supporting independent optometrists and setting them up in their own businesses to serve the needs of their local community. So it works very well with us. In fact, it's that nature of removing. So what we're trying to do is remove some of the barriers for customers who are visiting their optometrists. They're the types of barriers that would encourage people to look at alternative channels to purchase, such as online, for example. What we're trying to do is make sure people visit their optometrist for their eyewear and eye care needs so that they can receive good quality eye care when they do.
In advancements in technology and so on, one of the topics that comes up quite frequently now is remote services, or virtual, if you will. But how do you see remote, whether it's refraction or just an overall eye exam, how do you see that playing into optometry as a whole and in Specsavers specifically?
The different aspects of that. We operate teleoptometry services in some of our other markets, and I think that's a really interesting proposition. It's an emerging service. It can offer flexibility, choice, accessibility for patients. So it's an important area for us. And as I said, we're offering it in some of our other areas. But the starting point for this needs to be patient care. And in ensuring this can be successfully upheld, we need to be able to successfully uphold the standards of care that are set out by the colleges. So while things like teleoptometry can be a really valuable service for patients, particularly in remote communities, it needs to go hand in hand with the option to be referred to a doctor for face-to-face examination if needed. So I would never advocate it almost as a pure remote service. I think it can be a useful addition to help patients in remote communities get access, much needed access to eye care. But it needs to be done in conjunction. It needs to be done, in my view, in a store environment. It needs to be done with a professional hand-holding the customers through that, and the ultimate option to see optometrists face-to-face if needed to.
With all of those the technologies being available to us, and it's difficult to predict exactly which way it's going, but I'm sure someone like yourself and others that I'm speaking to have some access to some information that might help guide you a little bit. Where do you see the optometrist, but what do you perceive the optometrist role being 10 years from now, or even 20 years from now?
I think there's always going to be a role. Technology is continually improving, and I think technology will always will continue to provide better insights and diagnostic information to optometrists. We've done a lot of work in the sphere of AI, understanding how that can get involved, but we still continue to see it as a tool and a really useful suite of tools, technology for optometrists, as opposed to replacing optometrists. So in our point of view, we're using levels of AI with the OCT machines we have in store today. They provide a custom dashboard for our optometrists so they can more easily detect issues with patients if they need to. So we're constantly working on developing these things, but they are primarily as tools for our optometrists.
I would say that there's some concern about, of course, we know that AI is a big part of healthcare, but some concern that that's going to then essentially move the optometrist out, and a technician can essentially take that role and read a chart and say, okay, it's red, so you should be referred. It's green, you're okay. How do you respond to that concern?
We're an optometrist-led business. So in our view, I think we would always see the optometrist as being a core part of the customer journey. And I think, as I said before, I think it's partly clinical diagnosis is key, but also patient care. And I think it's having that balance is key. So I still think a trained optometrist is going to be a core part of the journey for a while to come.
We touched on the educational system a little bit here, and the level of education and the number of graduates is very different in North America, especially in Canada. I should really just focus on Canada here. We only have the 2 schools, and only one of them is English speaking. But in the UK, it's very different. There's been quite an expansion in the number of schools in the UK. Of course, that means that there's a larger number of optometry graduates in the UK over the last decade or two. And it's that growth of the optometry graduates is exceeding the growth of the actual population. So this question is twofold. Do you feel in the UK that there's an oversaturation of optometrists in the market? Is that leading to a devaluation of their position? And the second part is, do you foresee that kind of growth in optometry schools and graduates happening here in Canada? Do you think it's necessary?
I don't know the numbers in the UK specifically enough to comment on the UK. In Australia, though, I can share some of the work we've done where we saw a market 10 years ago which was underserviced. It was undersupplied by optometrists, and there weren't enough optometrists to service patient needs, and consequently that resulted in long waiting times of optometrists, optometry clinics. It was a barrier to rolling out clinics to remote areas. It resulted in less frequent visits to optometrists, and consequently a bigger strain on the healthcare business because eye disease wasn't being detected in a timely fashion. So we actively got involved to improve that position, and we worked with the industry to increase the supply of optometrists in the country. I see a similar position here, if I'm being honest. I see a real shortage of optometry graduates coming through, and some real barriers to optometrists being able to practice in Canada. And I think that is driving some of the same traits here, and it's resulting in the Canadian industry not being able to actively service the needs of customers, particularly in some remote areas. So it's one of the barriers, I think, to to giving patients accessible eye care.
And when you say that Specsavers got involved in that, how can you elaborate on what that exactly involved?
Sure. We worked with government, we worked with the local colleges and associations to grow the intake levels of optometrists across the country. So we helped to fund and invest additional places in optometry courses, which relieved some of the shortage and stress in the industry.
So there were investments made in schools. Is that correct? Like, were there new schools opened, or were the current schools, they increase their capacity? What did that look like?
Yeah, combination of both. So we helped to support them. As I say, they aren't run by us. They're independent colleges and universities taking their own decisions, but we helped to support where we could.
Do you feel that there's a bit of a conflict when an organization is involved at the educational level?
I think we helped support as a market leader in the industry, and it was something that wasn't unique to us. It was encouraged. All the players in the optical industry were encouraged to follow that lead.
So you would say, and as you mentioned, you feel there's a need for that in Canada to increase the intake of students, and of course then the output of optometry graduates. And you would say, in your mind, it'd be kind of a similar setup. If you were to see it happen, it would be industry organizations, entities like Specsavers or FYI or whoever, contributing to schools opening up and more students entering.
I think as a country, Canada has a shortage of optometrists. It's as simple as that. I think there's a need for us to develop more future optometrists coming through. As you said yourself, there's only one college that has a relatively small intake every year. And if you look at the growth of the population, there isn't nearly enough optometrists coming through to satisfy that growth. And that's going to put continued strain on the industry and the optometrists who currently work in the industry today. And it's going to result in the eye care needs of many customers and many Canadians not being met.
From a profession standpoint, if there's more optometrists than in the market, as a kind of first part of that question, I know you weren't able to comment on the UK market, but if there's a larger influx of optometrists in the market looking for jobs, then foreseeable, and it's perceivable that their value will then decrease, right? If there's a lot more optometrists, what they're going to get paid or what their perception of their value is going to decrease. Would you agree?
I think we're all in this industry for the same reason, which is we want to be able to provide good eye care to patients and detect eye disease if needed. That's fundamentally why we're all here. And I think we'd all agree that the right thing to do is make sure we've got the right level of cover of optometrists for customers' needs in Canada.
One of the unique things that we have here in Canada is that, of course, we have the US neighboring us, and there's a whole bunch of schools in the US. And of course, there's fairly open access I went to school in Boston, for us to come back to Canada from the US. The transition is fairly straightforward. And of course, that's allowed the numbers of optometrists to stay at a reasonable level. It's not just the one school that's putting out their 80, 90, Waterloo, I can't remember what their number is per year. But the program in the U.S. is essentially the same. Waterloo and New England College, where I went to school, and others have essentially the same academic program, the same graduation, 4 years, and the fourth year is all clinical and all of that kind of thing, standardized exam. But for optometrists in other countries, it's not the same program. As you know, here we have the Doctor of Optometry degree. In other countries, it's a bachelor's, or if I understand, in the UK, it's now a master's. What is your feeling on optometrists from other countries coming in? It's a fairly rigorous program that they have to go through right now, a 2 or 3 year program, and exams that they have to go through. Do you feel like that process of those optometrists coming to Canada needs to change, or is it okay the way it is, as far as you're aware?
I think it's a shame for Canadian graduates who want to pursue a career in optometry that they have to go to the US often to get it. And it's, as I'm sure you can advocate, it's an expensive route to go down as well. And I think that's a barrier many people entering our industry, which is a shame. I think it's absolutely right that there's high levels and high standards for optometry kept in Canada, and I think that should maintain. I think that's great. But we do need to also find a way to encourage more people into the industry and have more opportunities. I think it's very prohibitive to for people to have to go to the US to qualify, who we then may lose to the US for a number of years and may never come back to Canada, which I think is a shame. So I'm a big advocate of keeping the levels of standard and levels of clinical practice and standards high in Canada.
Staying on the conversation about schools and graduates, these days, it's quite a different market than it was just a few years ago, where new grads now seem to be in very high demand. And, there's different organizations, whether it's Specsavers, FYI, or others offering various incentives for these new grads or young optometrists, high salaries or signing bonuses or forgivable loans. And on the surface, of course, that sounds pretty glamorous for a new optometrist to have all of these incentives being put in front of you. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether you think it's actually the optometrist who's at an advantage here, who has the leverage here, or is it possible that the money, the incentives are potentially clouding their perception and their decision-making for the long term of their career?
Yeah, it's interesting because optometrists are highly skilled professionals, and it's a really competitive job market. We spoke to optometrists, and we've held a number of focus groups to understand what's important to them. And for students, incentives like the ones you mentioned are important to them because they graduate with substantial loans, particularly if they have to go to the US to qualify. And that can be a really heavy weight for students. But what's interesting in the work we've done is that we found whilst that is important, there's other things that are actually as important to them. So culture is absolutely key to have an alignment of values, maintaining their independence, the environment they're going to go into, so who they work with as a peer, as a mentor, and having that in place, and location of the clinic as well. Plus what ongoing development programs and growth will be for them, both professionally and also their careers, their career and earnings potential over time. So it's not just one thing that's important to graduates. I think focusing on some of these big financial incentives up as a standalone probably isn't right. I think it's offering people the wider suite of things that they're interested in. So these are all the things we focused on. Things like the culture and the environment you work in is absolutely critical. We've actually been ranked as a great place to work, as the great place to work in Europe for a number of years in a row as a consequence of providing the right culture and environment for optometrists, and not just focusing on the financial aspect of what they do.
Yeah, we're demanding people, us optometrists. Hey, we want it all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We want the money, we want the location, we want the culture. I mean, it's not wrong to ask for it, right? So what would you say to if you had a young student in front of you considering going to optometry school? Would you encourage it? Would you put a disclaimer on there? What would you say to that person?
Of course, I'd encourage it. Absolutely encourage it. I think it's a great opportunity for them for, as I said, the reason why we're all in it is to improve life through better sight. That's the reason why Specsavers is here. And I think if they've got an opportunity to focus on that and to help their patients and to wake up every morning helping patients in their local community, and that's what they do, I think it's a very fulfilling direction to go in. So I'd absolutely advocate it.
Thanks for doing this, Bill. I really appreciate it. Is there any other anything else you'd like to share? Any other message you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, actually, for having us on to tell a bit more about our story. We're really excited about being here in Canada, and we're really excited about the journey that we are planning on going on over the course of the next few years, and the people who are joining us on a daily basis to help deliver high quality eye care and affordable eyewear to Canadian customers. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Bill. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody who's been following along the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast, and this special, the Future of Canadian Optometry conversation that we've been having. Make sure you share it with your friends. Make sure you let all of your, fellow Canadian colleagues know that we're having this conversation. There's been a lot of amazing insight, a lot of, really important information being shared here by the guests that I've had on that I think is going to be very, very relevant to all of us going forward. And as we're all hoping to grow the profession. So thanks for watching and listening. Make sure you share it, take a screenshot, put it on Instagram, put it on LinkedIn, put it everywhere that you are. And shoot me a message and let me know what you think. Thanks again, guys. Take care. Okay, guys. So there it was. That was episode number 3 of the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma here on the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. This interview was with Mr. Bill Moir, GM of Specsavers Canada. Again, I think there was a lot of good insight in there. If you were listening, you're picking up some of the cues and some of those reading between the lines about what Bill was saying about what the plans are for Specsavers in Canada. Let me know what you guys thought. Please send me some messages, leave some comments, and of course, make sure you stay tuned. There are 3 more interviews to go. The next interview is with Mr. Rick Gadd, who is the president of Essilor Canada. And after that, the next one is with Mr. Alfonso Cerullo, who is the president of Lens Crafters in North America. And finally, we're going to cap it off with a fantastic interview with Dr. Kerry Salzberg to give us the perspective of a successful independent OD from his perspective about what we need to do as optometrists to make sure our profession thrives in the future. Thanks again for tuning in, and thanks again for sharing this with our colleagues across the country to make sure all of us are really hearing these conversations here on the 2020 podcast. I'll see you again in the next episode, which is the interview with Mr. Rick Gadd from Essilor this Friday on the 2020 podcast. Take care, guys.